Happy Friday, and thanks for tuning in to Radio Free Rhinecliff.org and this show in particular. Correct me if I'm Norm. I'm your host, Norm. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Susan Golomb, who is also a host of a show right here in Radio Free Rhinecliff.org called Mixtape, right?
Yes.
And I listened to some of them. They're so much fun, and you clearly have a lot of fun doing it. And I especially liked the one with Robert Warren.
Oh, Robert Burke Warren. Yes.
Robert Burke Warren. Robert Penn. Oh, there's an author, and you're a literary agent. That must excuse my confusion. Which was great. It was a two-parter, and it was all about Bowie, and you all shared your favorite Bowie songs. And you shared a story which was really nice about hearing a Bowie song in the way back of your folks' station wagon, and your mind just being blown. Can you tell that again?
It was when Space Oddity came out, so it was 1969, I think. And so I was 9 years old, and I just remember thinking, this is the most amazing song. It just, you know how when you hear some songs, you remember exactly where you were when you first heard them. And
yeah.
So I just was floored by it, and I was just a kid.
Right. And where were you? Where was the station wagon at that point in time?
It was on the FDR Drive. I even remember that.
Okay.
Yeah, going south.
Going south. So did you grow up in the suburbs? Were you
Yes.
leaving the suburbs to go into the city?
I was born in the city, and then we moved to Tenafly, New Jersey.
Oh, nice.
When I was 3. And
Okay.
my father commuted to the city to work, and Tenafly is kind of a bedroom community of New York City.
Right. Huh. And you stayed there the whole time, like through high school graduation?
Yeah, my dad's still living in there.
Uh-huh.
In the house I grew up in, which is the only surviving split level in all of New Jersey.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I'm sure.
How can you possibly know that? I see. You're sure of it.
Yeah. I mean, Cardi B lives like 4 houses away. And I mean, everything is a McMansion. And our house is like a little cottage with lots of land. I mean, it's a 1 acre plot, but it seems like...
Which is a lot of land in that
like
kind of
country.
a suburb.
Yeah, exactly. Because everyone else builds right to the border.
Right. They fill up the entire lot with usable square footage of their McMansions.
Exactly.
So do you get back there often?
I do, yeah. I like to visit my dad. And so I drive. I would be tempted to take the train because we can do that up here in lucky Rhinecliff, but I drive so that I can stop off and see my dad, and I come up the thruway.
Right. To take the train, you'd still have to cross the river somewhere.
Well, no, if I took Amtrak, exactly. Well, that's why I can't take the train. That's why I drive so that I can see him. So right. I go over the George Washington Bridge, and then I go up the thruway. And
Makes sense. Yeah. And does he still work in the city?
No, he's 99.
Oh.
And he has dementia. He's in hospice now.
Oh, rats. You know what? I actually knew that. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You have siblings?
An older brother.
Uh-huh. And is he around here?
No, he's actually living in the same house as my dad. So he's sort of taking care of
That's kind of what I meant, was like on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So that's so wonderful that he's there to help out on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's helpful.
Great. And your dad, I read somewhere, was a surgical oncologist.
He was an oncological surgeon.
Okay.
Yes.
An oncological surgeon. All right, good. And I wondered when I read that, what it must have been like to grow up in a house with somebody who has such a serious job.
Well, it's funny. I have 2 different memories. My dad was incredibly kind. Like, he was unusual for a surgeon, and that he was incredibly sweet to the nurses and to everybody, and had that old-fashioned bedside manner. And but I have 2. He was working he was on call for much of my childhood, so which would mean that you'd have to come into the city to the hospital and do rounds, see his patients on the weekend, and because he worked so many hours during the week, the weekend was time to see his kids. But the only way he could do that is to take me on rounds with him. So I have early memories of being, on his shoulders and walking into these rooms with these, very old patients. And a lot of them were like, oh, the doctor's daughter, let me touch her. Like I was some kind of talisman, that I was going to cure them. it always freaked me out because they were so old and sick. And
right.
But and then another time I remember coming down to the family room and my father's playing this like movie on a screen, and it was an operation, and it was just so disgusting. It was like, just really bleh. And that turned me off of a medical career very early on.
Oh, there you go.
Not gonna happen.
There goes my next question. And prior to that, did you think, I mean, it sounds kind of dreamy in a way for a kid to be like going around with their parent, doing their work and seeing what they do for a living and stuff.
Yeah, I was never interested. My father actually brought my brother into the operating room when my brother was like 16 and had him like observe and maybe even hold a scalpel or who knows what he did.
And did that turn your brother off, or did it
No, he became a doctor.
Oh, there you go.
But not a surgeon, a neurologist.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, it was also a pretty serious job. And what was your mom doing at the time? Was she working as
She was a housewife, but then she started acting. But when my brother and I were a little older, she started in community theater, and she eventually did repertory theater, and she eventually was off Broadway, and then did a couple of off Broadway. And
what a blast!
Yeah.
So did she take you to work as well?
No, but we came to like every performance of hers, even when she was in really bad plays, like really bad.
And do you remember any of the really, really bad plays?
Oh, yeah, there was one called Dancers on My Ceiling. And my mother, because at her age, by that time, she couldn't get like the main roles. So she was like the landlady or the next door neighbor.
Right.
And in this case, she was a maid in a principality somewhere.
Right.
And the playwright liked her so much. She kept giving my mother lines, so the maid was asking the prince all these inappropriate questions. And so my brother and I remember we were stuffing our shirts into our mouths to keep from cracking up because it was so absurd. So, yeah.
And big brother, little brother?
Older, yeah.
And did you get in trouble for that kind of stuff?
No. She knew it was ridiculous. But,
right.
Yeah.
But still, there's hardly anything better in the whole world than what I call the church giggles. When you should not be laughing.
Right.
And you're with your brother or a friend, and you can't help it.
Exactly. That's what it's for. For sure.
Wow. And so do you remember any place that she was in that really were good, that really moved you, the way Space Oddity did?
There was... she was in a version of a Nathaniel Hawthorne story, but I forget which one. But it might have been called Pumpkinhead or something. It was really good. It was at Soho Rep. I remembered that. I was proud of her for.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so you graduated from Tenafly High or something thereabouts?
Yes. Yeah.
Tenafly High. And you went off to college somewhere where...
University of Pennsylvania.
And were you interested in the arts? Were you interested in theater and stuff?
Yeah, I loved acting too, but I saw what my mother went through, so all the rejection. So I thought, I'm going to have all the power. I'm going to be the playwright. I don't know what I was thinking, but I took a playwriting course and immediately got writer's block because there's nothing harder than writing plays, really. I mean, you can't. All you have is dialogue. You can't have an establishing shot to show that someone works in this office building in Midtown. You have to work that into the dialogue.
Right. So how long did that last that you thought you'd write?
Not very long.
And did they really have all the power, the writers?
No.
So you're misinformed.
Yeah, I was very misinformed.
And misguided.
Yes.
So what did you do after that? You decided that was not...
So when I graduated, I bounced around because my first love was theater, and I worked for one of the last of the independent theater producers, who was a guy like the Zero Mostel character in The Producers, and he was just a wretched human being.
Oh, no.
So that didn't last long. And then my father, when he would see his patients, he would always, ask them what their careers were. And if anyone ever was doing something that he thought I might be interested in, he'd be like, I have a daughter. So I got a couple of jobs just through that were in publishing, that were at literary agencies. But I kept getting pulled back into sort of the theater world because that's where sort of my first love was. So I worked at PBS at Great Performances for a time, and I was the production coordinator on a version of Alice in Wonderland that they did that was all-star. It was amazing. Richard Burton was the White Knight, and
wow.
his daughter Kate was Alice, and Colleen Dewhurst and Maureen Stapleton were in it, and Nathan Lane, before Nathan Lane was even famous, and it was thrilling. It was really thrilling.
And that was for PBS?
That was for PBS, yeah.
And what did you do there?
So my job was to, make sure that all the actors knew their call times, what days they had to be where, and then it could be anything on set, like Richard Burton needed cue cards, so I had to do up cue cards, and Maureen Stapleton was really neurotic, and I had to get her home, and one day I ran lines. Kate Burton was sick, so I got to be Alice in Wonderland with Colleen Dewhurst as the Red Queen and Maureen Stapleton as the White Queen, and I'm acting with them, and I knew that this would be one of my top 5 memories of my entire life, and it still is. There was nothing like that.
What a blast.
Yeah, it was a total blast.
And did that make you rethink sort of being an actress?
No, I knew.
So what was it like watching your mom? I'm very interested in this. Working as an artist,
right?
Trying to get to success and dealing with a lot of rejection, but I'm guessing she kept on trying.
She did. She used to say that the only place she felt alive was on stage. I mean, she was definitely, she loved my father very much. She loved us, but she was like one of those housewives from the 60s who were bored out of their fucking minds, and so here she just loved acting.
Right. What a treat. And had she done that in her youth, or did she take to it later in life?
No, I don't know how she came to it.
Right.
But we did for her birthday one year. My father, so Hirschfeld, the caricaturist?
Yeah.
He had a gallery near where I was living in the city.
Right.
And I somehow learned that he did commissions. So for one of my mother's birthday, we got him a photograph of my mother in a play.
Melting my heart.
Yeah, and he did a caricature of her.
So this is the guy who did on the Sunday Times newspaper, every Sunday for decades, a beautiful line drawing of whatever was going on Broadway.
Right.
And he hid
his daughter's name.
Right.
And my father was also an artist, and he was a cartoonist. And when I was in camp, he would send me cartoons of what he and my mother were doing while I was away, and he would fold in Susan's.
We love that. So how many Ninas were in the Hirschfeld commission?
Of my mother's?
Right, because that was his daughter's name. He
would put
in Nina, and then
probably 4 or 5.
He'd sign it and put a little number next to his signature.
I'll have to look next time. Yeah.
What? So do you remember how excited she was when she got that?
She was thrilled. I mean, she was just...
It'd just be over the moon.
Over the moon. Yeah.
What a beautiful, beautiful, perfect gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did this thing for PBS, which sounds amazing. You got to stand on stage and read lines with all these stars. You still didn't get the bug for acting. What happened after that?
Well, then I ended up at a literary agency that handled book authors, but also screenwriters and playwrights and television writers. So I felt like I still had a foot kind of in that world. And then after being there for 3 years and learning everything there was, a really great novel came in over the transom, and I asked my boss to represent it, and that sort of started my career as an agent. That's when I kind of said, okay, this is what I should be doing.
You said a book came in over the transom?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That means unsolicited. So, writers send their work to agents, because the agents then help them get published, because most publishing houses don't take direct submissions from authors. They need an agent.
And so were you reading sort of the books that came in out of the, is it slush pile?
Right.
So you were charged with reading them to see if anything was interesting. And would you read all of them, or 10 pages, or
it depended. I mean, they're really bad, just 10 pages.
They're really bad, 10 pages.
1 page.
Or 5.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could tell if it's just terrible and the grammar's for shit and the spelling's bad. page is probably enough.
Yeah.
And were there books that you read all the way through? Like you needed to find out how they ended, even if they were crappy?
Yeah, I know. I'm such a sucker for narrative. I always need to. It's very hard for me to put something down. I'm like, oh well, what's going to happen?
And you'd get to the end and be like, well, I can't pass this on because it's not that good, but it kept me going.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Did you ever pass? I mean, I guess you were sort of the gatekeeper. And there was an editor or an agent or somebody above you. Did you ever pass stuff on and say, look, it's total shit, but I had to read it in one shot, like 8 hours straight. So that's something?
I don't think I ever did that. No.
Right.
Yeah.
So you respect that?
I mean, I wouldn't turn down, my taste is literary and what's called upmarket fiction, which is like book club fiction, but I think I would know, like a really great page turner. I'm not a snob. I mean, if the plot was really engrossing and it was poorly written, but it was really kind of, cliffhanger after cliffhanger, I think I would know to recommend that, but that just never happened to me personally.
Right. All right, you say you're not a snob, but here we get a little lightning round, a little quiz, a little literary quiz. You ready? It's literary middle names.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
Ready? Jonathan Franzen. Earl. J.K. Rowling. This is a tough one. All right. T.S. Eliot. A.E. Housman. Okay. And the last one, Joyce Carol Oates.
Carol.
That's right. That was the trick question.
You said you weren't going to embarrass me. No,
I had others like J.D. Salinger.
I should know my client's middle name, but
I'm so sorry. I thought you would, but people don't use their middle names.
Not often.
And he doesn't.
Yeah.
But lots of people use an initial. And I was like, I'm gonna quiz on what these initials stand for. And so I did a little research. The most interesting of them was Philip K. Dick. The K stands for kindred. I'm like, that's a pretty middle name.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So in the first one, your client, Jonathan Franzen, I believe is the guy who came over the transom and you picked out a slush pile. And you were reading probably looking at 10 books a day or something like that. And you read his. And what was it about it that stopped you in your tracks? And how quickly did that happen?
Well, right away. I mean, it was his just command of the sentence, and it was engrossing. But what was really also remarkable was this novel was called The 27th City, and it was about St. Louis and this bizarre Pynchon-esque plot of a police chief to do a real estate scam to move corporate money around, and it had a lot to do with just, they call them systems novels. It had a lot to do with just how our society is set up, and at the time in St. Louis there was a blighted inner city, and there was a lot of white flight, and so it also addressed sort of the causes of all that, and his command. So his command not just of the sentence, but characters, but then he also knew all this stuff about tax law and about politics in India and all these corporations that were thinly disguised. Like St. Louis is like the head of like Nabisco and a bunch of, Anheuser-Busch and all these like major American corporations. And he had sort of hidden, disguised the names, but, he had all these like wild CEOs and it's just the breadth of knowledge was staggering.
Right.
And I was very intimidated. But I knew that one part of the book should go. And I knew that like the first sentence of the fourth chapter should be the first sentence of the book.
Oh, nice.
And there were other things. So when he came in and I had to meet with him and tell him I'd like to take this on, but, would you be willing to do this work? It was very intimidating.
I'll bet. And how old were you at the time?
I was 26 and he was 27.
Oh, wow. So you're reading the books that come over the transom in this slush pile and stuff. I mean, it's not sort of a high level job, I would think. It's an entry level job for being an editor.
Well, I wasn't, there was a receptionist there, but I was an assistant to my boss, so I was negotiating contracts and I was doing...
Okay, so you were doing all of that.
Yeah.
So then you were the agent. Was your boss his agent, or did you say, I want to do this one?
I said, this is the whole story. I don't know if I should tell. It's a very long story, but I said, I want to do this one. And I wasn't on commission. I was on a very low salary, and I didn't care about the money. I just wanted the experience of representing this great writer. And she said, fine, go ahead. And she hadn't had any really big successes on her list. She was independently wealthy, and she was kind of doing it as a hobby. And then when I submitted the book, and the editor who bought it started telling everyone that this was the best thing he'd ever had, it was on the heels of the book Presumed Innocent. So even though this was a more literary book than Presumed Innocent, there's a whole apparatus in publishing that's people who scout for foreign publishers and scout for movie companies, and it's their job to know what the next exciting book is. So everybody got all excited, and so the phones at our office started ringing off the hook because everyone wanted to know about this book. And my boss got very threatened, and she fired me.
Oh. Well, what happens next?
So then I remember living in the East Village and being out of a job, and the book came out and got great reviews, and I was out of a job. And I remember in the courtyard, I took a glass, and I said, "Fuck you," and her name, and like smashed it into the courtyard. And you know, what's that line? Like the point when you can have revenge, you don't care anymore. That's kind of, you know, eventually I went on to just start my own agency out of my apartment. Jonathan came to me with his second novel. And
okay. So
he was loyal.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
There's the best revenge,
right.
Living well.
Yeah.
So she shit-canned you because she was threatened. You'd like taken her little agency to another level where it had never been with this first novel. And after she fired you, did you get in touch with Jonathan? Did he get in touch with you?
You know, I have to talk to him because I forget. I didn't want to leave him in this really compromised position because he still had to be at that agency because I was fired before the book came out, and there's still stuff that the agent needs to do for the writer. So I didn't want him to be uncomfortable. So I can't remember exactly how I described the circumstances of why I was no longer there. I eventually did, but I kind of let him play out, you know, the two of them play out that portion of the publication of his book.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so an agent finds a book they like, and then they shop it around. They find a publishing house to put it out. And that sounds like that's not the end. I mean, you make the deal, the contract's signed. Is the agent still involved in
that's just sort of
press and the PR
that's just
and
the beginning,
book cover and
exactly
the tours and
so the place where we're most effective and have sort of the most power is when we're pitching the book and we're editing the book, we're selling the book, we're negotiating the contract. Then the author starts working with their editor, and as agents, really all we can do is sort of watch over the process and sort of give our opinion and make suggestions for what they should do for publicity or marketing, but we don't have the purse strings. We can't make those decisions. So we're basically trying to keep the editor and the publisher on their toes and not neglecting this book. And then, you know, there's a jacket that comes in, and we want to make sure that it's a good jacket. And sometimes we're like, no, you have to go back and do another version. And then when the book gets published, we really sort of lose any, you know, then it's up to the gods, really, because it depends on if it'll get reviewed and how it will get reviewed and then how it will sell. And so then we become sort of the psychiatrist or the mother of the author. You know, we're just holding their hand through the process.
Right. Telling him, oh, the Times never likes the best stuff anyway.
Yes,
Don't
exactly.
even think about
Yes,
it.
or just start writing your next book, and then.
Right. Huh. And so are the publishing houses usually receptive to agents' suggestions on that front? Those fronts?
It depends on the publisher. Some of them don't like it, and some respect the agents. And if it's a smart agent and someone who's being reasonable, they appreciate it. I mean, a lot of times you want all hands on deck. You want, like I have my own contacts in the media, so if I know someone that we can get the book to, and the publisher doesn't know them, then
right.
that helps everybody. But sometimes the agent can be a pain in the ass, and it's our
right.
job. And I'm always kind of have to pick my battles. There's some things where I'll get on the phone and I'll be very forceful and say, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. But I can't do that all the time because I want that publisher to buy the next book I send them. And if they think I'm
right.
a horrible person, they might not want to. So.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a dance.
Yeah. All right. I want to go back to the East Village. You're out of work. You parted ways with this agent who practiced you and enriched a lot. Franson somehow decides that he wants to track you down and work with you. So I'm guessing he got wind somehow of the injustice of it all.
Yeah, I told him at some point.
Plus, also probably felt a certain loyalty. He's like, well, here's this Susan woman who saw this thing that. Let me ask this: had other agents passed on his book?
I think there was one agent who did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's always a thing, for people that pass on what turns out to be amazing.
Yeah.
And I'll ask this: getting ahead, have you passed on books that later went on to just be amazing, or to do amazingly well?
I'm so lucky that that's never happened to me.
Right.
I don't think it's happened to me. There are some books that I lost out to because sometimes a writer will submit to several agents at once. And then if a lot of us want the book, we have to do something which is called a beauty contest. We don't have money to throw around, but we have to persuade the author to come with us. And you never know. Sometimes an author wants an agent who's going to do a lot of editorial work with them. Sometimes they don't want that. Some of them want to be with the agency that represents Jonathan Franzen. Some of them don't want that. So you never really know what they want to hear. So I have lost some books to other agents, and some of those have gone on to do well. So
right.
That's always a drag. But I win a lot on my share of those contests, so it's okay.
Right. And certainly I would think having a big name represented at the agency would be helpful. Getting other other authors that represented publishing houses.
Yeah, I think most smart writers would like that and not feel intimidated. But some people feel they want to be the big fish in a small pond. Sometimes
right.
they think, oh, I'm not going to give them enough attention because I've got all these other famous people. So
right,
writers are.
So back to that first Franzen book. You said you read it and you thought, oh, the first sentence of the fourth chapter or the fourth section, whatever, should be the opening sentence. So, do you remember what that sentence is?
It was a long time ago, Norm.
I don't remember anything that happened yesterday. So, but you had other ideas on how the book might be different and more to your taste. I don't want to say better because whatever. And did those thoughts go forward and become part of the final published book?
Yes.
And how often does that happen? Because I sort of think editors, gets to a publishing house, the editor wants to do their own thing with it, put their own, taste on it. And would the editor be aware that you had made these changes?
No, not necessarily. No.
Okay.
I mean, I might when I'm submitting a book, if I still feel the book needs more work, because sometimes you can only take a writer so far. Sometimes I'll do many, many drafts with a writer, and then they get impatient. They're like, can we just submit this? And the reason I do all those drafts is I know the stronger the book, the better the deal I'll be able to make. But, writers need to make money, and they get tired, and so they're like, can we send this out? And so sometimes I'll say, well, we'll go out, but if we get a consensus, if everybody agrees with me that, X is a problem, then I'll want you to go back and address that, and then we'll go out to some other people.
Right.
So that is kind of a common thing that happens.
And does, from that point, do writers often just get fed up with the whole thing and say, you know what, to hell with you, I'm not making any more revisions?
Well, sometimes a writer will just say, I'm done, like, let's send this out. And then hopefully I'm still able to sell it. And then the editor who buys it wants to make changes. And sometimes I always think it's really hard to write a perfect book. I mean, I think it's good to have editorial notes. I think it, for the most part, if they're not misguided and it's not a stupid editor, then I think their job is to improve the book. Sometimes an editor will start messing with something, and I once had to step in and say, no, you can't make the author do that. He's not going to do it, and you got to stop.
And why wouldn't the author just say that?
The author sometimes needs the backup of the agent. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How very interesting.
Yeah.
So Franston comes back to you in the East Village. Where were you in the East Village?
On Avenue A and 7th Street.
Oh, nice.
The epicenter of the East Village.
Yeah, right there. I used to go to a place down there between A and B, Joe's, a little pub. I think it was on 6th.
You went, well, there was Joe's.
A pool bar.
Yes. Well, I was a big pool. I used to go to all the different pool bars.
We probably played pool.
So Sophie's was my favorite. They had the best jukebox.
Yeah.
So Sophie's was between A and B on 5th. And Joe's had a country jukebox. And that was on 6th. Yes, 6th between A and B.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved that place. So Franston comes back to you with his second novel. And what was that?
That was called Strong Motion.
Okay.
And in that case, this was a situation where he got a lot of great reviews for his first book. So this time he didn't really want my notes, and and his editor kind of also had notes. But I don't know that Jonathan took his notes. But anyway, so that's what happened with that. And then his breakout book was the third one, The Corrections.
Right, which you represented as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the first book was great. The second book did okay. And so I'm guessing that really affects how easy it is to sell the third book.
Right. Well, what I also did in the interim was got Jonathan some work at the New Yorker, know, and so that also kept his name as he was having writer's block, and he was having trouble with the third book, but it kept him sort of in the awareness of readers and the publishing community.
Right.
So he started writing for the New Yorker, and then.
And what kinds of things did he write for them?
He wrote a great piece on the post office. Yeah, really smart. That was a great piece.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned St. Louis. Was he from St. Louis?
He was from out at Webster Groves, which is just outside.
Oh, Webster Groves.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
You know it?
I do know Webster Groves. Yeah, I mean, in college, my senior girlfriend was from Webster Groves.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
okay.
She was great. Her dad was a funeral director out there, and was the nicest guy.
How old is she?
63.
Oh,
yeah.
He might.
Yeah, I'm much younger than that. Yeah, I was like 12 when I went to college. So at what point were you aware of what the third novel, The Corrections, was going to be about? Did he and do most writers work like this?
Well, this is a great story. So Jonathan had written something like 200 pages of a book and then called me and said, I don't think it's any good. I'm getting rid of it. I'm like, what? He's just like, yeah, it's no good. I'm trashing it. And then he started talking a little bit about what he was thinking of, and I remember said something like, does he have any brothers? And he was like, and then that gave him the idea of this, story of a family that were two brothers and a sister. And then when that came in, it was like, sometimes you just know something is like the greatest thing since, sliced bread. And it was. And when people started reading it, because there's a process once the book is sold to the publisher, they make something called a galley or an ARC, and it looks like a paperback, but it's basically an early version of the book. And that's what goes out to the press and to bookstores, and that's what goes out to create interest. And people just started talking about this book. And also, when I started to sell the foreign rights, we sold as soon as the novel was finished. I submitted it to agents that I work with all around the world. So I have an agent in England, I have one in France, and I have one in Italy. And it was like Europe was just falling like dominoes. We sold it all over the world. And it was so exciting because it's a very American story, but it was also something that every family could relate to.
Right.
And for years I had a hutch that I put all the foreign versions of the book because the covers are so crazy. Like each country sort of does a cover that they think will appeal to their readers, and some of these were like, it's so funny. Like, the American version had a family around a Thanksgiving table, and there was like one version that was just an empty table, and there was another version that was just a turkey. And then the Israeli version, I'll never forget, was a pickup truck with the Statue of Liberty in the back of the pickup truck. It was really funny.
Is that a plot point?
No, it's just like they're like, this is an American novel. It's like,
that's hilarious. And did they come up with different titles in different countries?
Yeah, well, it always has to be. I mean, the author has approval of the title, and it's usually as close to the American as possible.
Okay.
So sometimes there's a phrase that just doesn't work in another country, and you have to sort of swallow something a little weird. But
right. So that must be sort of a dream for an agent to have a manuscript come in and just know, like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing. It's going to be huge. We're going to have like bidding wars, and it's going to be worldwide.
Yeah.
Your career spanned 30 some years, I'm guessing. How many times has that happened?
It's happened a lot, but it's getting harder and harder.
And why is that? Is the business changing?
Yeah, the business is, I've been doing this long enough that I've seen it go up and down. And, when there was the recession, that was a bad time in publishing, and a lot of publishers were canceling contracts. And after 9/11, that was another, period of retrenchment. But there's been a steady, just like with all these industries, there's been so much mergers and conglomerizations of publishing. You used to have so many independent publishers, and now there's only like two major independent publishers, and the rest are part of larger entities.
Two major independent publishers.
Yeah, Norton and Grove Atlantic. And then there are smaller ones, but they're very small.
Right.
So,
and who are the huge mega?
Well, so there used to be a big 7, and then there was a big 6, and now there's basically a big 4. It's Penguin Random House, which swallowed up Crown, and then Penguin, and merged with Random House, and so that's the largest one. There's Simon and Schuster, which includes Scribner and Atria and many other imprints. And then there's HarperCollins, which includes Harper and Echo and Morrow. And then there's what's the matter with me? Penguin, Harper. Oh, Macmillan. And Macmillan is for our Strauss.
Oh boy.
St. Martin's, Flatiron, Celadon. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. And 2 of them are owned by Germans, and then there's Hachette, which is Little Brown and Grand Central, and they're owned by the French. So HarperCollins is owned by Rudolph, Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch.
And so were there always sort of like younger publishing houses coming up, trying to make their mark, getting books that aren't going to be published by the big 4?
Yeah, I mean there've been again, it ebbs and flows of people trying to do this. It's just very hard.
Yeah.
And what's becoming harder is it's affecting, this whole attention economy has become a real challenge. And so the very big names, the Stephen Kings and James Patterson Ellen Hildebrand, people like that are selling great, in bigger numbers than ever. But a debut novelist, or a novelist who's on their second or third book but never became a mass phenomenon, it's harder. And what we're discovering right now, which is very distressing, is the old levers that used to really sell books were if you got a great New York Times book review or you got on NPR, you probably get on the bestseller list. And now, it just doesn't really move the needle a little bit.
What's moving the needle now?
These book clubs by these women. So Reese Witherspoon, Jenna Bush, who has the Today Show book club, and then the Good Morning America book club, and Oprah. They can make a bestseller. But even their picks don't always become bestsellers. Sometimes they'll just get on the New York Times list for 1 week.
Right.
Sometimes they become their own, become huge bestsellers. But that and TikTok, which is working for very commercial women's fiction.
Very commercial what?
Women's fiction. So
really?
A lot of romance. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But does TikTok have any sort of like gender skew?
For books, it does, and it's women
right.
who do these little videos, and they're crying, or they're laughing, or they're shocked because of the twists, or they're having jump scares. It's something that they can visually react to that will go viral,
right? And
then suddenly the book really sells.
And so who's making those videos? Like just literary influencers? Or?
They're influencers, but the publishers have no sway with them, which is sort of sweet. There's sort of an integrity
That's nice
to
to
it.
hear.
Yeah, you can't buy them off. And when the publishers try to make their own TikToks, they're usually pretty shitty. So
right.
It's an organic thing, but we don't know really how to harness it.
Right. Which is, as you say, it's good and bad. Because it'd be nice if you could kind of harness that.
Right.
And do you know any of them? Have you met any of these TikTok literary influencers?
No, I have not.
It seems like such an unlikely collection of words to have on a business card.
Yeah.
TikTok literary influencer.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of effect on sales. So if a book is, as you say, like on the New York Times bestseller list for like 1 week, that's still probably a pretty good payday, I would think.
Yeah. The list is relative, so it just depends on the week. Some weeks the books are selling in really big numbers. Other weeks maybe less so. So your chances of getting on are a little greater if the numbers aren't so high.
So if you're on 1 week and it's Christmas, that's probably the best week to be on.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh. And here's a question. How much, for a hard copy book, how much do authors make sort of per copy on average?
So it's about $3 a book.
Uh-huh.
A little less, a little more, depending on the discounting. It gets kind of Byzantine with sort of, but so the author gets. When you look at a book, there's a price printed on the book, and the author gets a percentage of that price. So they get 10% up to the first 5,000 copies, 12.5% to the next 5, and then 15% thereafter. So if a book sells more than 10,000 copies, you're getting, $3 off a $25 book kind of thing.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And then the higher your advance, the less likely you'll earn out your advance. So, because you earn it out by making that number back in your royalties.
I see.
Yeah.
And until you cover your advance with actual sales, you're not seeing any additional money.
Right. But you are guaranteed that advance. So the job of the agent is we want to get you the highest advance possible.
Right.
Yeah.
And so do agents get a percentage of?
Yes, we get 15% of everything the author makes.
Okay.
Of their earnings and when they earn it. So
right.
Yeah.
So the publishing company pays the author that, the agent gets their portion.
So what happens is usually an advance is paid in quarters. There's a quarter when you sign the contract, a quarter when you deliver, and they accept the manuscript a quarter when it's first published and a quarter when it comes out in paperback 12 or 18 months later.
Oh.
And so when that signing payment comes in, it comes to the agency. We take our 15% and send the remainder to the author.
Right. Huh. Interesting. I had no idea it worked like that.
Yeah.
So you were a big part of your job is like identifying, what's a good story, well told, but also making a deal.
Yes.
And how did you learn to do that? I mean, it sounds like you were working for somebody else for a couple of years.
Yeah, it's an apprenticeship. It's really not something you just can learn. I mean, because we wear all these different hats, and I'm taking off a different hat and putting another one on like 20 times a day, because there's, the editorial hat who's reading a manuscript or working on edits of a manuscript, and then there's the salesperson hat, and then there's the deal making, cigar chomping business person, hat, and then there's the lawyer's hat because we're negotiating the contract, and then there's the psychiatrist's hat, and and you're just playing a different. Maybe that's where the theatrical part comes back. I play a different role with every phone call.
But that must keep it kind of interesting.
It does. It does. It keeps it very interesting. And when I would never want to do anything other than what I do, because I love to read, and there's nothing nicer than being up here in the spring on my porch reading a wonderful manuscript by this new writer, and I'm feeling like I've discovered somebody, and this is so exciting. And then a lot of pre-COVID, we would go out to lunch all the time with other editors. We'd go out to drinks. We would, it's a very social business. COVID's really kind of killed a lot of that, and but still, that was fun. You'd go out to lunch with an editor who's at Simon Schuster, and he's got like the new Bob Woodward book, and he's telling you all this stuff that's going to be in Bob Woodward's book. It's fun. It's exciting.
Right.
And yes, and then every day is different depending on what all my clients are going through. So some days are very stressful, and some days are happy days. And,
right.
Yeah.
So way back in the East Village, you started your own agency, one author, and you had your own place for a couple of decades.
So yeah, then I kept, I started growing, started taking off very slowly, and I eventually had my own agency in Midtown and had employees, and we were cooking along, and then in 2015, the publishers started trotting out an idea. They wanted to try something like a subscription model, like you have with Spotify or something like that. And it started to feel very overwhelming to me in terms of how do you track royalties. And I felt like maybe it's time to join up with a bigger entity that can deal with all the bookkeeping stuff.
Right.
And I also wanted to go on safari with my son, and I wanted to be away and not have to feel like everything is on my desk. And so that's when I joined this other agency called Writer's House, which is...
Right, because you were sick of wearing some of those hats.
Yeah, I mean, all the admin and, all
right.
that. Yeah, it was taken off my plate.
And how long have you been with Writer's House?
Since 2015.
Okay. And so I'm guessing that's been a pretty good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And your authors who you've worked with, I'm guessing most of them sort of land with you and stick with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Did any of them jump ship, saying, "Oh, I don't want to be part of a bigger thing"?
No.
Good.
No. I mean, because the writer is their relationship is with the agent.
Right.
I mean, I suppose there are writers who might have. I mean, no one's ever had a problem with Writer's House. It's a very nice, menschy kind of group of people. I suppose there might be a writer who doesn't want to be at ICM or William Morris, which are kind of more, I don't know, a little bit more cutthroat, and they're also, Writer's House is the largest pure literary agency in the country. Like William Morris, the bulk of their money comes from things that have nothing to do with writing. They represent
Gotcha.
football players,
right.
and television anchors, and so the book business is the tail of their dogs. So sometimes changes can be made in LA that are going to affect the New York office, and you're a little helpless. That's why I never wanted to work for one of those agencies.
Right. So it sounds like Writers House is a great place to land, especially if you're what you do, so it's more literary stuff.
Yeah.
Do they have...
Well, they do a lot of commercial stuff, too, but
okay.
They're just...
By commercial, you mean like James Patterson or...
Well, they have Nora Roberts. They have, this Sarah Moss, who's a gigantic romance writer now, that John Green, children's book writer, Stephanie Myers, the Twilight writer.
Okay.
Who do they have? They have Michael Lewis. They have a lot of big names.
Right. And those things are probably just massive, like the Twilight series.
Yeah, I'm like peanuts next to that.
Right.
But I'm fancy.
Oh, you're fancy. I see. You give them some.
I'm Fred Astaire to their Ginger Roger.
Street cred on the nicer streets. So do they have their own reader going through the slush pile, or do you have your own sort of employee within them who goes through your slush pile?
So I have an assistant, and then I have interns. So things come in, and it's sort of my assistant's job to kind of do the triage and say, all right, this the intern should read, this I should read, and this Susan should read.
Right. Huh.
And then if the intern likes it or the assistant likes it, then it eventually comes to my desk.
Right. And you get like 20 or so manuscripts a day?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, at least.
At least.
Yeah.
And every one of them eventually gets looked at?
We try. I mean, it takes a while, yeah. Yeah.
Right. And do they all come in with like a query letter?
Yes, they should. And many of them come as referrals. So they're either an author is referring someone, or an editor, or someone else in the business. But then there's what we call pure slush, where somebody comes in, has no connections at all, has never been published. And I've found great people who are just slush.
Pure slush.
Including Jonathan Franzen, and many other New York Times bestselling authors that I've, represented. So
right.
So it doesn't really mean anything. If you're referred by somebody, you get my attention a little quicker. But it's not necessarily going to...
Because one of the interns, their assistants, reads the query letter and says, oh, they dropped this name or that name.
Yeah.
And...
Yeah. Or they've been published before, or, in the Paris Review or something, or they went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, or, Columbia or something, other little things that might...
Does it get harder for writers who've been published, say, 10 or 20 times to just sort of middling success to get the 21st? Look, you're...
Forget about 20. I mean, if your first book doesn't do well now, that's the end. That's the end.
Really?
Yeah, it's bad. I mean, it's called a track.
Right.
So once upon a time, no one knew how well a book did except for the publisher and the agent. Nobody knew. So if I had an author...
And presumably the author.
And the author.
Right.
So if I had a second novel in by an author whose book didn't do well, I could still go and really push the book. But now that knowledge is public. And so the editor looks at that bad track record and they're like, yeah.
Yeah, no.
I can't overcome this track record.
Like, no matter how amazing
Occasionally, if something is so amazing, like you cannot put it down, and it is just a banger, you can overcome it. But that's hard.
So many amazing stories that must exist about publishing in the publishing world. Are there books or collections of these stories? I mean, it's interesting to people. I think the publishing industry.
I mean, there's a book I didn't read because I never have time to read books that aren't manuscripts that are on my desk. But there was a book called The Other Black Girl, I think it was called, about being like the only other black editorial assistant at a publishing company. And I think they made it a TV show.
Okay.
And that was kind of also showing the inner workings of publishing. There have been some books
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the most recent one I know about.
Huh. Now, so you've led a life in literature, really, for decades and decades, excluding any authors you've ever been involved with, because that's problematic. Who are some of your favorite writers, and what are some of your favorite books?
Oh, God.
Look at this. You're like, I'm going to insist on the questions ahead of time
yeah,
next time.
I mean, the thing is, like, I really don't have time to read for pleasure.
Right.
So I'm lucky in that I really like my clients' work. So I love Jonathan Franzen and I love Rachel Kushner. I mean, they're amazing. I mean, there are writers who I wish I represented, like George Saunders or...
he's just amazing.
Yeah, or Laurie Moore or... I don't know that. I mean, I like Lily King, but there are lots of great writers. I just haven't had the chance to read them. I'm going on vacation. I'm going to read Anne Patchett for the first time because I'm going to Peru. So, and I'm looking forward to that. But
right, that's funny. Yeah. The busman's holiday.
Yeah,
reading other books on vacation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it sounds kind of dreamy. So eventually, I'm guessing, after The Corrections was published, say, you got a house up here in Rhinecliff.
Actually, I had a house in Olive before.
Nice.
Low tax Olive on the other side of the river.
Low tax Olive. Love that. And which is gorgeous, a lot more rural.
Yeah.
And then how did you get from there to here?
When I got divorced, the house in Olive was on a lot of land, and it was really remote, and I was afraid to be there alone because no one could hear you scream if the axe murderer came.
Right.
So I sold it and put all my stuff in storage, and then I had a friend who lived in Rhinebeck, and she just was on my butt. She just kept sending me listings. She's like, Susan, you got to get a house up here, and there's a train, and it's so easy, and if there's bad weather, you can always get into the city, and she finally just kept sending me stuff, and finally I found a house that I really liked, and I bought it. And I was so fortunate because I bought it in 2017, and then when COVID happened, I had a place to decamp.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And do you still spend some time? Do you have a place in the city?
Yeah. I have a one-bedroom apartment.
And how often do you have to be down there?
So I'm supposed to be there 3 days a week, and
who says supposed to?
Well, my boss says that if you want your own office, you should be there 3 days a week. Nobody's taking attendance.
Right.
So some weeks there are different clients in town or events, so I'm actually there 4 or 5 days. Some days nothing's going on, so then I stay up here.
Right. Well, we're almost out of time. I don't know how it happened. I just looked up at the clock. You saw me look, my jaw dropped. I thought we had like 30 minutes left. I
thought the cane was coming.
30 seconds left, which I guess I don't even have time for another question. So I'll just extend the thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And holy crap, it zoomed by so fast. And I have another like 8 pages of questions and things I want to talk to you about, including AI in literature and in publishing and in all of the arts and stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back.
Part two, good. Susan Golomb, thanks for coming. And everybody thanks for listening. Have a fabulous Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you for having me.